Well, hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 11 of The Horse and His Boy, The Unwelcome Fellow Traveler.
This is a fantastic chapter.
It's a great chapter.
Oh,
Was
man.
that sailor giving us little thoughts here?
Yes,
I don't know if it
opinions.
picked up on the microphone, but he had something to say when I was doing the little intro there.
Yeah.
I have to say that this is, before we get into the episode, the juxtaposition between the beauty outside of where we're recording and how uncomfortable I am in this seat is really something. Where are we recording at, Phil?
We're at an Airbnb. We're deep in the mountains. We do have internet, but it's pretty slow. And we are on the porch with, if you can hear it, with our
an
dog.
Unhappy dog.
It looks like you just earned yourself a ticket inside.
So while Sarah Jane takes him inside, we're on like the front porch, or what was originally a front porch,
Used
but
to be a
has
front porch. It's now a sunroom.
as like a little sunroom here. No heat, but it actually feels nice and cool in here.
Yep.
It's like probably about 50 some degrees outside. It feels good in here. And it's beautiful outside. There's literally a stream that runs down maybe 15 yards.
I don't know who you have to call to get a stream put in, but
They
it
did a
really
great job, yeah.
classes the place up.
It's all the way down from the top of the mountain to the bottom.
I say, why stop there? Have it run through the house.
And so it's gorgeous outside. I mean, it would be gorgeous outside. It's completely pitch black dark outside right
Yes,
now, but it
but
was all day.
We arrived here in pretty much pitch black dark. And then we woke up this morning and realized, oh, this is a beautiful area.
That is true. Like, I'd only seen the pictures, obviously from the Airbnb website, and then the three of us got in, and the kid and I, we all got in like 7:30 last night. So I saw none of this. And then we woke up and it was much more beautiful. But despite all that beauty, we are maybe recording on the most uncomfortable couch we've ever recorded on.
Yes.
You and I don't think we've ever also recorded on the same couch 2.5 feet from each other.
Right.
We're just staring directly into each other's eyes because we are forced to.
We're kind
do you
of
want to just
sitting
turn
side
and look
by
out the
side
window
and
instead?
we're turned
Yeah.
so that we can face each other. There's a fantastic piece of science fiction called Bilenium. Have you ever read that?
No. I've never heard of it.
Confirm who it's by.
Well, while you're confirming, you already did it. That was quick.
I did.
Okay.
Bilenium is a short story by British author J.G. Ballard. Have you read any of his stuff?
No? That's the guy who found the Titanic, right? This is Robert Ballard.
I thought it was James Cameron.
No, he didn't find it.
Oh no, it was that old lady. She found it.
No. The guy who found it is what's the actor's name who finds it? Oh man, this is bad. There's so
Leonardo.
No. In the future scenes. Will you tell us about this?
Anyway, Bilenium
is
is this story about a population. This is thousands of years in the future, but the population has grown so much that people.
Bill Paxton. That's who it was. I remember now.
Okay,
so I wanted to say it before I got to the IMDb.
Heard it here first, people.
You heard it here first.
Bill Paxton
1997
played the guy
Titanic.
found the Titanic.
Bill Paxton discovered the Titanic.
Okay, Bilenium is a story by J.G. Ballard. It's about the future, and it's a future that is incredibly overpopulated, where people have to share rooms because there's not enough space for everybody.
Okay.
But then one of the characters finds this extra room in a building, and he moves in there and enjoys his stuff. But right before that, everybody is so crowded that if you have a friend over, you can't both sit apart and face each other. You have to sit side by side because the rooms are so tiny and compact, and you have to turn and look at each other. And we recorded an episode, and then we are now turning and rotating so that we're facing the other way, so our necks don't get overstrained.
I think we said we're
session.
shooting for the episode to be about 15 minutes total, so we can wrap it up.
Just for our necks.
Yeah, just for that. Well, it might be hard for us to stay at the 15-minute mark because there's a lot to discuss here in this chapter. We get the revelation of Aslan's providence throughout this entire book here. The unwelcome fellow traveler is the great lion himself, which I actually did not see coming. Mm-hmm. As we get into that, I don't know. I assumed that he'd be in a chapter. The very next chapter is Shasta in Narnia, and I assumed that was where.
That's where you'd meet him, but They
where
surprised you.
Aslan was going to meet us. But no, it was here in this chapter.
We're also going to discuss what a furlong is, so stay tuned for that.
Well, why don't, before we jump in, it's an odd chapter, so I have the chapter summary. Are you ready? Let me say this first. This was one of the most difficult chapter summaries that I've done because I wanted to include so much of the Aslan stuff here, but really that's only the last 3 pages of the chapter, maybe even 2 pages, and there's a lot of other stuff that happens as well too, so it was a little tricky for me, but I came in at 149. So you ready?
All right, let's hear it.
Shasta runs madly out of the hermit's garden in an attempt to reach Archenland and warn its people of Rabadash's invasion. Eventually, he runs into King Loon and a group of his men. Shasta warns the party about the Calorman army, and the Archenlanders provide Shasta with a horse. His horse falls behind, and he loses the other men as night settles in. After traveling in solitude, Shasta faces a difficult decision as he arrives at a fork in the road. He is forced to decide his path quickly when he hears the Calorman army approaching. The army passes by, and Shasta continues his journey. Soon, he is terrified by a figure walking alongside him. Shasta shares his story with the figure, who reveals himself to be Aslan. Before mysteriously disappearing, Aslan tells Shasta that he has played a crucial role in Shasta's journey, even back to his birth.
Wow.
I told you that it's not one of my favorite ones I've ever written. I struggled with it just because so much happened, and I also wrote it in like 3 minutes, but that might have been the hardest. That would be more
hardest 3 minutes of your life. Well, there was quite a bit that happened, and I feel like you covered it all.
Which I tried to. Yeah, I wrote it like right before we started recording.
I was saying wow to how much stuff happened in the chapter, and I
thought the wow was to me like wow.
Yeah. That's why I'm clarifying.
Well,
let's dive in. So at the very beginning, Shasta runs into the Archenlanders.
The Archenlanders. Man, it's so funny. I feel like
I cannot say
there must be something about whoever reads the whole book for some reason can't pronounce the names of anything, because I feel like I've done a good job pronouncing things this season, and you've struggled.
I think you've been listening to more audiobooks because you have a kid.
I actually did not listen to the audiobook at all for this chapter.
Oh, okay.
Didn't have a chance
I mean
to.
For the book in general.
Oh, that's fair.
And they've talked about.
That's fair.
Archenland.
With a K.
Archenland.
We've gotten like multiple emails from people saying Archenland.
Is it multiple or is it 2? Which is multiple, but is it 2?
It's 3.
3.
So
okay.
Look at that. Well, it was 2 emails and a message on Twitter or Patreon. I can't remember, but somewhere else. It was 2 emails and a different one too. So and all of them really upset with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to fix it.
Named you by name.
This can be redeemed.
Mm-hmm. So Shasta runs into the Archenlanders pretty quickly, right? He's tired, he's worn out, but he runs into none other than the actual king himself. And if it wasn't for Aslan later in the chapter saying, hey, I kind of, ordained all of these things, it does feel like quite a little coincidence here that he runs into the king himself.
Right. But it works out.
It does. And this is the first place I want to stop and talk, because the king, pretty nonchalantly, pretty quickly, he recognizes Shasta. He says, Corin, my son, and on foot and in rags, what? And then Shasta really quickly, he's panting, he's tired, he's sweaty, he's in rags, as we heard. And I guess we've learned he's barefoot, right? Mm-hmm. He's like, hey, there's an army coming. Rabadash has 200 Calorman men, which sounds silly to say Calorman men, but, Calorman soldiers. That way I don't have to repeat the word men twice. Calorman soldiers, and they're on their way. And the king pretty quickly is like, he even tells one of his other attendants, like, hey, if he says it, I believe him. I think the guy's name is Darren, which is the least Narnian name we've ever come across. Is there a least Narnian name? And no offense to any listeners named Darren. No problem with your name. It just feels weird in Narnia.
And if your name is Darren, just send us an email because I've never met a Darren before.
This Darren is
not spelled like this.
Darrin, which does feel more Narnian. The En, I think, but like it'd be also like meeting a Phil in Narnia.
Yeah,
and that's like a biblical name too. Like there's no, like, but it just like a Phil. It's about as weird as a science fiction epic that takes place 10,000 years in the future, where the main character's name is Paul.
Yes, but I'm also a little. Because it's been done so much, every time they change a little bit of a word, like it's still the same name, but they just alter it slightly with one letter.
Yeah.
That's a little hard too.
I know, but I do always feel like with Dune, Paul and Jessica.
They could have done P-A-H-O. Yeah, I know.
Well, it's just because like there's other people are like Harkin. I know that's a last name. Okay, but you've got Leto.
Yeah.
Duke Leto, right? You've got Duncan. You've got...
Duncan, Idaho.
Stilgar. You have Cheney. You have Irulan. There's so many other like science fiction-y names, and then just throwing Paul in there.
Yeah.
And Paul's a great name. I have no issue with the word Paul, the name Paul. It's actually I'm going to bring up St. Paul and just the Apostle Paul in just a little bit later on in this chapter.
When we talk about furlongs.
No, actually, believe it or not, it's not what it's coming up.
I'll give you a hint. It's not a type of hot dog.
Is that what you thought it was?
Yeah.
Okay. But so King Loon, he gets Darren to be quiet. He believes the truth in his face. Pretty quickly though, here's my first issue with King Loon. Here's a guy coming out of the woods who looks exactly like his son, and he just kind of accepts it. Is King Loon aloof, or is he so terrified about the army he's willing to let go of the fact that there is a doppelganger of his son?
Yeah, he may not even be fully paying attention to what he said first. He's just focusing on the second part, which is that this.
But see, this bothers me. Let me talk about this for a second, because all right, so I think my dilemma has been proved to be true, which is that Corin and Shasta are definitely brothers, okay? And they're twin brothers, which means, I guess there's a small chance that this happened differently, but this means that King Loon would know that he had two sons, and for some reason he only has one of them now. So wouldn't he be like, oh my gosh, this is a kid that looks just like my other son. This must be my long-lost twin, unless for some reason he didn't know that he had twins.
Yeah.
So
which is very possible.
It is possible. It happened to Darth Vader. He didn't know.
Right. He had no idea. Very different circumstance.
It was a little different. Yeah. But why isn't King like, wait. Can you at least... Because in a minute he's going to ride with them. He'd be like, "Can you at least ride next to me so we can talk about the fact that you look like my kid?"
I don't know, man. Have you ever had someone tell you that there's 200 people coming to invade your land?
Here's my other problem, and I'm going to talk about how incredible this chapter is in a minute. So I promise I'm not going to just rag on Jack's writing here, just storytelling.
Oh wow, we're on a first name basis again.
It's not his first name, so I feel like Clive would be inappropriate.
Yes,
but Jack is fine.
Yeah, Staples for short.
This is actually funny. We started because I do about a 6-7 week unit on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in one of my classes, and we started it, and I gave a little introduction, obviously, to Lewis and to the Chronicles of Narnia, just because why wouldn't I? And I told my kids, C.S. Lewis likes to be called Jack. I usually only refer to him as Lewis in my class. I do it with all the authors we read, really. One of my kids, one of my students, as we were doing like a little Socratic seminar on just like the opening chapter and this idea. I'm not going to get into all of it, but the point is, one of my kids kept referring to him as Jack. He's like, well, when Jack did this, I loved it.
Yeah,
I thought it was incredible. He was like, well, if that's the name he preferred, like go for it.
Yeah,
he didn't like Lewis. Or CS,
especially if a kid
Staples
tried to call him that, he would love that.
I know. I thought it was so great. So I was like, because he was like, "Can I call him Jack?" I'm like, "You call him whatever." Yeah, I mean, you can call him one of his names. Don't make up names for him. But I think Jack's fine. I think he would have loved that. But the other thing here, I have never been to war, so correct me if I'm wrong. But 200 people does not seem like a lot.
Yeah, but we don't know how big is Arkenland. Do you know
if they have a king, I mean, maybe it's a really, really small town.
Yeah.
I feel
like 200 people could do some damage pretty quickly.
No, still would do damage. Like, it's still 200 soldiers coming to fight is still a threat.
Yeah.
But especially
if it's a surprise.
but they act absolutely terrified here. And to me, it sounds like Shasta was like pretty much saying, "There's 10,000 Uruk-hai on their way to your city. You better watch out." You know?
Maybe it's like, what was that movie that had 300 soldiers in it?
Oh gosh, what was it called?
I guess the name's not important.
I don't remember what that one was called.
But I think a trained army with the element of surprise can really do something.
Yeah, but even with that movie, it's by that guy that did Justice League. I think was it called Justice League? That can't be right.
Maybe it was the Snyder cut of Justice League.
But even with the Battle of Thermopylae, though, you have, I mean, there's a lot of myths surrounding that, anyways. But the Spartans are known as these kind of incredible warriors, and so when they're fighting the Persians, I don't know. You're correct. I think that you're good to bring up that idea, but just it doesn't seem like. It seems like the Arkalanders are losing their minds over what to me feels like a threat, and a significant threat, but not an insurmountable threat.
Yeah, I agree that it's surprising, but I also think that 200 soldiers with this element of surprise coming is enough for him to be like, we'll talk about the fact that you look like my son in a second. Let's handle this thing first. A king's going to be good at prioritizing.
But wouldn't you, and no offense to King Lone here, okay? Let me just play devil's advocate for a second. Wouldn't you also be like, I haven't seen this army coming. How do I know I can trust this guy who also looks just like my son? Like, there's already some like sketchiness to it. Like,
yeah, but he can see the truth in his face.
He can see. I guess that's true. Maybe that's his thing. Let me ask you this. This is an important question. We're here at this little mountain cabin. How many people could we defend ourselves from here?
0.
You think we could do one?
We almost left because of a mouse.
All right, sorry, that was an awful belly laugh. Yeah, I was gonna say we could take maybe one kid.
Yeah,
that was. So I'm sitting here making fun of them, and I'm like, no, I couldn't take 200 people.
Yeah,
I couldn't take one. If this was Home Alone, we would lose. You know they're making a new Home Alone.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Sure. And
that's
what. You can't stop it.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the kind of stuff that I'm like, that's fine. Why not?
I'm getting really good at ignoring anything that they add on to something. You just pretend that it didn't happen. And sometimes you have to do that in between series. So, like we were talking about James Bond earlier, 2 and 4. I read the plot points to remind myself because it might be necessary, but then you can kind of skip it.
Let me ask you this, and this is a great game for our listeners to play at home alone. How many Home Alone movies do you think there are?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah.
Counting the new one. Coming out this Christmas on Disney Plus is Home Sweet Home Alone, that's fun. That's a fun little title there. I'm sure a lot of families are going to enjoy that around Christmas time. How many Home Alones are there, do you think?
No. No, we can't answer now. They have to think
about it.
No,
I want you to... No, they can just guess literally right now as you were about to answer.
Including the one coming out, I think 5.
You think there's 5? Okay.
Yeah.
You're close. There's 6.
6, including
there are
the one
6 Home Alones. There's 1990's Home Alone and Home Alone 2 Lost in New York. Then there was Home Alone 3, which people of our age were pretty familiar with because you and I both born in 91. Home Alone 3 came out when we were a little bit older. Home Alone 3 does not have any of the original cast, but does have Scarlett Johansson. Do you remember this? I think this is maybe her first film role.
Did not know that.
Yeah, I think that might have been. She was like the kid who gets left at home's little or older sister or something. All right. Then in 2004.
I thought she was in E.T.
What? Oh, no. That's Drew Barrymore. Then there's Home Alone 4, Taking Back the House in 2002. This is also very interesting because they have not committed to whether or not there's going to be subtitles or numbers in each of these. There's Home Alone, then Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, then Home Alone 3, no subtitle, then Home Alone 4, Taking Back the House. Then the 5th one, I didn't even know about this, 2012's Home Alone, The Holiday Heist.
Wow.
And then coming out this year, oh my gosh, Malcolm McDowell was in Home Alone, The Holiday Heist. Malcolm McDowell, famous English actor from a lot of movies that I'm not allowed to see, like A Clockwork Orange and Caligula, but also famously from a movie that we've talked about a lot here, which is Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. He plays Chancellor Valorum. That's the only movie I've actually ever seen him in. Yeah, I've never seen those other movies.
I have no confidence in him.
He also was in he was also the bad guy in Star Trek Generations, which is a movie I will never rewatch because it's really bad. It's not good.
So, quick aside, why do you think our episodes are going so long?
Look, we actually get we get listener feedback. People like it when we get a little off topic here. We don't want it to go off the rails. But you and Sarah or Sarah was listening to one of our episodes recently. What did she say?
We talked about this last episode, but
we did.
She said, "Is this really what it's like?" Because our Dancing Lawn episodes, the ones that we do for our Patreon patrons, we really just let it go. There's no structure, or there is structure, but it's much more free, and we'll bounce around and talk about quite a few things, and then come back. And
we're already in that mode because we just recorded a Dancing Lawn episode like 5 minutes before we push record on this one.
Right.
So we're in a little bit more of a casual mode. Do you want me to kind of tighten it up here and be a little bit more formal?
You don't need to tighten it up too much, but we should get back on the horse, just like Shasta did.
Shasta did. Tell us about that.
So the king says, "Do you know how to ride a horse?" And he doesn't.
Do
answer.
I?
Yeah, he doesn't even answer. He just jumps up, one foot in the stirrup, swings his leg over. And
Were you proud of our protagonist here?
What?
Were you proud of our protagonist?
Oh, yes. Because you get to see, we're in chapter 11, and we get to see this tremendous change that has taken place. He didn't know how to ride a horse at all. And now he has so much experience in a few weeks, which I'm a big fan of. Like, get that concentrated experience.
Yeah.
And now he's able to show off. It would have been a little funny if he had messed that up. Like, he was so confident, but it actually takes more than a few weeks to get good at it. But
yeah.
It's a fantasy, and it's really fun.
That was
fun.
Show off. So they get on this, or he gets on this really slow horse, not a talking horse, a dumb beast, if you will. And he pretty quickly falls to the back of the pack, and the fog settles in. He's overwhelmed by how difficult it is to see in the fog. And pretty much as they go around these turns, they're traveling through the mountains here, he quickly falls behind. And he's almost out of sight. He can hear the trumpets ahead, but he is out of sight of the rest of the Archenlanders, which again, look, I mean, I know we just met King Lune, and it's really rude for me to be speaking so poorly of royalty here. But, like, again, this is a guy who looks exactly like your son that just came out of the woods saying another army is coming. I don't know why you don't have your eyes on him.
Yeah, he should be up front.
Well, or at least, like, why didn't they just... How old Shasta? Like... 12 maybe. Just throw him on someone else's horse. There's no way he weighs more than like 100 pounds.
Yeah.
Throw
have him share.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Like have him share with somebody else. I'm concerned as to why they're just way too trusting of this kid. Yeah. I would be more freaked out about this than anyone. I guess me and Darren. I would be really good friends with Darren, I guess, because we're both a little concerned about how trustworthy Shasta is.
Yeah. But instead, they leave him kind of behind again.
Seriously.
And this cloud starts coming down, and they get lost in the fog. And now Shasta's by himself again.
Mm-hmm. And Shasta does try to kind of, I guess it's not called using his spurs because he doesn't have any spurs, but he does try to kind of, is there like a name for when you like kick a horse with the heel of your foot? Is it actually called spurring?
I would have said spur things along.
Oh, that makes sense. That's where you probably get the phrase from.
Yeah.
So he does try to spur the horse along, and I love the way that Lewis just writes to like, instead of doing like he like trots for 4 or 5 paces, and then he like gets even slower. Which is just great. And Shasta's remark to it is, well, I suppose even a walk will get us somewhere sometime, which I think is pretty nonchalant for someone who's running away from an army.
I feel like that's something you could say to your kid as you're walking alongside him.
Yeah, I can walk get you somewhere
super
sometime.
Slow, but I guess eventually we'll get there. I get a little bit of an Exodus vibe from the fog.
Ooh,
kind of settling down on this mountaintop.
I don't
know if it's a direct thing or maybe he's just
And what about the
alluding
Bob
to it
Marley
instantly.
song is this bringing back to you?
When Moses goes up on the mountaintop and the fog kind of descends and he talks.
Oh, the
to,
book
talks to
Exodus,
it.
not
Yeah.
the Bob Marley song Exodus. You missed
Yeah.
my joke. It's fine.
I didn't hear it.
Ugh, that was like the one time I was doing one of your jokes. Not one time. I did it a couple times. But no, I actually literally have a little bit of Exodus I want to talk about later. I pulled something from chapter 3 of Exodus. So.
Oh.
Yeah, we'll get to it.
What a quinky dink.
So it's at this point in the chapter where Lewis writes this paragraph. Presently he, meaning Shasta, came to a place where the road divided into two. He was just wondering which led to Anvard when he was startled by a noise from behind him. It was the noise of trotting horses. Rabbadash, thought Shasta. He had no way of guessing which road Rabbadash would take. But if I take one, said Shasta to himself, he may take the other. And if I stay at the crossroads, I'm sure to be caught. He dismounted and led his horse as quickly as he could along the right-hand road. The sound of the cavalry grew rapidly nearer, and in a minute or two Shasta realized that they were at the crossroads. He held his breath, waiting to see which way they would take. And then they appear, and I'm not going to read all of it, but we get some pretty harsh words from one of I don't know if this is Rabbadash or not, but one of the leaders of the Calorman army. What happens here, Phil?
So he basically gathers them all together and he says that they're pretty near the castle. And this is where the word furlong comes into play.
Oh, do you want to read this part then?
Well, I just want to tell everyone the definition of a furlong. A furlong is an eighth of a mile.
An eighth of a mile.
Yes. Or an eighth of a stadium in Roman speak. But I really like this term.
You mean Latin?
Hmm?
Roman speak?
Yeah, or Latin, depending on what you want to say. But I also love that they're trying to define what a furlong is, and it comes from a furrow, which is basically a trench that you dig in a farm.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, it's just a super old word, but they're very close to the castle.
Okay.
And the reason that we don't know who this is they don't say, we just hear this voice in the fog.
You know, I knew a furlong was a unit of distance. I did not know how. I thought it was more than a mile. So what's interesting to me here, and I had not thought about this until you just shared this wisdom with us. Okay, an eighth of a mile they're so close to the castle. Is it just because of the fog that we can't see it?
I think so.
Is that
I think
why
it's
it's
so
that thick of fog?
Yeah, because he can't even see someone that he can hear.
Oh, that's
that
true.
Wouldn't usually be the case.
Man, and this voice has a lot of things to say. So this voice reminds the army that they'll be at Narnia by sunrise, and they're to kill as little as possible. They're going to regard every drop of Narnian blood as more precious than a gallon of our own, or he says your own. But then he's like, but hey, when we hit up Anvard, he's like, we're going to go nuts here. He's like, we want to kill every man and take all the women, the gold, the jewels, the weapons, and the wine, all for yourself. And then he says this, the man that I see hanging back when we come to the gates will be burned alive.
Some pretty harsh words.
I don't even know if we can read this on the show.
Yeah, as we were getting closer and closer, I was like, ooh.
It was like, first I wasn't going to read it, and then I was like, I guess I just did. So this is grim, and it really just shows the depravity of the Calormans here. There's this, like, I mean, the way that I'm reading it, there almost seems to be this, like, glee and joy in the violence that's to come.
Yeah, and I think, maybe part of it is that this is his own mission. He's in charge of the whole thing, and
Do you think this is Rabbadash?
I do, and I think that he's being kind of over the top. But then this is immediately contrasted with the fact that we still can't see anything, but Shasta hears 200 men on horses go by, and it takes a long time.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you're stopped for a train, and it could be 40 cars or it could be 250 cars.
Oh my gosh!
And it just goes and goes and goes, and you don't realize how many cars can be attached to a train and how long that can take to pass through.
there's a train on my way to work, and sometimes I get stopped at it, and sometimes it's an Amtrak, and it's like 6 cars, and we're nice and good. And sometimes it is I don't want to over exaggerate, but I'm going to guess probably 6,000 cars. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I'm glad you didn't.
I'm going a little low. It probably is more than that, but I don't want to hyperbolize here. So it's a lot. And but although now my son loves it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, it's fine. It's fine if we're an hour late to work because of this train.
Yeah.
He's having a good time.
Yeah.
So all of these horses pass by, 6,000 horses. They all pass by here, and Shasta thinks he is safe, except that's when things get worse for a bit.
Well, then he starts hearing voices.
I thought he just heard a single voice. You're saying voices here.
He starts hearing a voice.
He starts hearing a single voice. And tell us about that.
Well, it's identified as the thing.
Capitalized, the thing.
The thing.
It's actually, Lewis has been on record as being a big John Carpenter fan. He was, I think he wrote about it, didn't he?
You and your deep cuts.
No, the thing is not a deep cut. That's one of the most popular movies of the last 50 years.
The Thing?
Yes. Is it not?
No.
I thought those are pretty deep. I thought those were pretty
maybe to a different.
Maybe not. Okay, yeah. Maybe a different audience. Sorry.
The Thing, unless it was a person. This is what Lewis writes. Went on beside him so very quietly that Shasta began to hope he had only imagined it. But just as he was becoming quite sure of it, there suddenly came a deep, rich sigh out of the darkness beside him. That couldn't be imagination. Anyway, he had felt the hot breath of that sigh on his chilly left hand. What a incredible, smooth introduction into saying that this is something he's hearing and something that he's feeling, and it's definitely real.
Yeah.
All in one smooth paragraph.
That's a really great little introduction here. And I want to talk about this from the perspective of, obviously knowing that this is Aslan the lion. I think it's interesting that the first physical sign that, the first actual thing that he feels here, Shasta, of knowing Aslan, is his breath. And all the way back to season 1, we have talked about potentially the idea of kind of Aslan's breath being this maybe supposal of the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. It's not an allegory, obviously. It doesn't work in every kind of instance, but this idea of kind of the Holy Spirit being with Shasta here as he's walking alone, as he's kind of at his lowest point. He's lost the Archenlanders. He warned them, but did he do it in time? It's unclear. We don't know right now, and Rabadash is headed off to Anvard and then later on to Cair Paravel. And as he is terrified of what is about to happen, he gets this breath that he feels on his hand.
This presence that he feels continues for a while until Shasta's the first one to speak. And I think this is incredibly intentional and incredibly just meaningful.
Why do you think it's important that Shasta's the one that speaks first?
I feel like what we're supposed to take from this is that this is similar to how God approaches us. God is always there. And now it's only when, he's not going to force us to do anything, but he is going to be very consistent and very present. And then we're the ones who start speaking to him, and then he'll respond. That's kind of my initial reaction to it.
No, I think it's a good point. Our Calvinist listeners might disagree with you, but I think you're making a really good.
Do you think they're predestined to?
Yeah, they were already chosen to. So we love all of our listeners. I also grew up Presbyterian, and most of my family's Presbyterian. So it's all done. Yeah, actually, both of us grew up.
We did. We had very different experiences.
Yeah, a little bit different.
Did you have padded pews?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
We did have padded pews.
We had padded pews, but then every now and then we would take them away because it sounded better.
Interesting.
It was this. That was how we negotiated it.
Okay.
Because the sound was so much better when they didn't have it.
Really?
Yeah.
For the organ or something, or
for the music in general, piano plus the choir and everyone singing.
Interesting.
And then one time all the seats disappeared and we weren't expecting it, and it was because they were being cleaned. And man, it really does sound better.
It does sound better.
It's so
Okay, interesting.
So Shasta is the first one to speak, and he goes, "Who are you?" And this response from the thing is, "One who has waited long for you to speak." And that's because of that response. I think this is a very clear.
No, and I agree with
thing.
you. I think Lewis is he's using his words very intentionally here. I mean, he always does, but especially in this exchange.
Yes. And then there's this time where, he's not sure he's real, but then Aslan breathes on him. And again, that's what you were just mentioning.
Yeah, that's
with
the idea of the breath, right? He's like, I'm the unluckiest person in the whole world is what he says, because he even asks, I think this is interesting. He's terrified that what he's talking to is something dead. Right, and that's when Shasta says, "Oh, I am the unluckiest person in the whole world." And then Lewis writes, "Once more he felt the warm breath of the thing on his hand and face." And then it says, "There, that is not the breath of a ghost. Tell me your sorrows." So again, it's kind of this comforting of the spirit, if we want to make that supposal here, in kind of the presence, right? The presence of the thing here. Being Aslan, that brings him comfort knowing that the presence is there.
Right. And then, so once that's been verified, Shasta shares everything that's been going on, which of course Aslan knows, but he kind of goes through a quick summary. And this a little bit reminds me of, there are parts in the Old Testament where they'll do a quick recap, or in some cases a very long recap, where you just read 3 or 4 books containing all these stories in the longest form, but then they'll do a quick summary. Shasta talks about everything that happens, and then Aslan's response is that was him. It was him the whole time. Mm-hmm. He was the lion who made the sounds and forced him to join Erebus. He was even the cat who comforted him. He was the one who drove the jackals away, and just on and on. Every single thing that he just mentioned, Aslan says, that was me. Like, this is where I was during that time.
Can I read that paragraph right now?
Yeah.
So, Shasta's going back and forth saying, there was, I was so afraid of all those lions. And, the voice says there was only one lion. He says, what do you mean? There were definitely 2. He's like, no, there's only one. He was just really swift of foot. And then Shasta says, how do you know? And then this is what is written.
I was the lion.
And as Shasta gaped with his open mouth and said nothing, the voice continued.
I was the lion who forced you to join with Erebus. I was the cat who comforted you among the houses of the dead. I was the lion who drove the jackals from you while you slept. I was the lion who gave the horses the new strength of fear for the last mile, so that you should reach King Loon in time. And I was the lion you do not remember, who pushed the boat in which you lay, a child near death, so that it came to shore where a man sat, wakeful at midnight, to receive you.
Well, then it was you who wounded Erebus?
It was I.
But what for?
Child, said the voice, I am telling you your story, not hers. I tell no one any story but his own.
But who are you? Asked Shasta.
Myself,
said the voice, very deep and low, so that the earth shook. And again,
myself,
loud and clear and gay. And then the third time,
myself,
whispered so softly that you could hardly hear it, and yet it seemed to come from all round you, as if the leaves rustled with it.
That would be a great scene if you had surround sound in your home theater set.
Yeah.
Just the leaves kind of whirl around you. So I also think that the myself part is a kind of a callback to the I am. Mm-hmm. Like, who shall I say sent me? I am.
Yeah, and I actually... I wanted to kind of share that because I know that we have a really diverse group of listeners, and there's a really significant portion of our audience who are not religious and are not Christians, and so might not have all the context of what Lewis is thinking of here. So I actually wanted to go right back to the Bible. Not right back, because we haven't read it yet. I wanted to go to the Bible, to Exodus chapter 3, just so for a little bit of just quick context. Exodus is the second book of the Bible, most scholars believe, written by Moses, and it is the story of Moses and the Israelites leaving captivity in Egypt and then being led through the wilderness. That's where he gets the name Exodus from, the leaving. So this, Exodus chapter 3, Moses has already fled Egypt by himself, and he is kind of living out in the mountains, and this is kind of the scene where he meets God in the burning bush. And this is what chapter 3 of Exodus says. Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight, and see why the bush is not burned up. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. And then he said, Come no closer, remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. He said further, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And just jumping down a couple verses to verse 13 here in Exodus 3. After this conversation, Moses is told he's going to have to go to the Pharaoh and demand that the Israelites be set free. And then Moses says this in verse 13. But Moses said to God, If I come to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said further, Thus shall you say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Thus you shall say to the Israelites, The Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my title for all generations. So there's 3 times here God says, I am. Well, he says, I am twice, and this is the 3rd time. I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The same way that Aslan repeats 3 times, myself, myself, myself. There's also, if you think about this kind of first reaction, or this first interaction here too, it's God speaks first, but Moses does say, Here I am, when he hears the voice of Moses. So there is this turning of the person on the receiving end of this divine revelation who turns and presents themselves, right, and acknowledges the presence. So you have Shasta saying, who are you? And Moses saying, here I am, right? So there's an interesting dynamic there as well too. But that is, I think it's very clear that Lewis definitely has this in mind as he's writing some of this interaction.
Right. And the reaction from Shasta is that he's no longer afraid of being eaten, but he has a what's referred to as a different sort of trembling that comes over him, but he also feels glad.
Yeah, and it's very much what we think with Moses, where Moses is taking off his shoes because he is on holy ground. He is in the presence of God Almighty, and that's both beautiful and absolutely terrifying at the same time. Okay. And that happens in this chapter as well too, right? With the light that we see from Aslan here, right?
Yeah, it's Shasta beginning to see him, and it becomes more and more clear, and then the source of light is Aslan.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what Lewis says as this light gets brighter and brighter. He even writes, it was, speaking about the light, it was from the lion that the light came. No one ever saw anything more terrible or beautiful. This is, just to take a step back for a second, this is one of my absolute favorite interactions we've ever had with Aslan, and I have no experience with this. Like, I don't remember a single, if I ever did read it as a kid, I don't remember any of this. I've never come across anyone talking about this in all the research I've ever done, and just, being part of the Lewis community. And that might just be because maybe people have mentioned it, but I haven't known much about it, so I just didn't think about it. But I'm surprised that there aren't, sermons talked about this. There aren't people who bring this up because, and maybe it is, and I'm just not part of those discussions, but this is such a beautiful picture of Aslan's love for Shasta, with the interaction they have, with the revelation of, look, I've been here forever. Since your very birth, there's been my divine providence caring for you, taking care of you, watching out for you. And it has not meant your life's been easy. No, it's actually been really difficult. And we can talk about some of the nuance that comes into that, because there has still been pain. And in fact, Aslan himself has even been the one who's caused pain.
Right.
And when Shasta brings it up about, like, well, hey, what is that about? Because you totally actually hurt my friend. He's like, I'm not going to tell you that. And that's not a helpful answer to Shasta, right? Just like when we might go to God, like, this bad thing has happened. Why has it happened? And there isn't a clear answer. And that's not what we want to hear, in the same way Shasta wants a better answer, if you will, from Aslan.
Right. And maybe the key there is that the pain is because we're not perfect, we're not God, and we've messed up, and the pain is getting back to the way things should be. And it's not going to be pain free. I see something in this, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. I feel like Shasta, so he says, luckily Shasta had lived all his life too far south in Clorman to have heard the tales that were whispered in Tashbaan. And referring to the tales about this, dreadful Narnian demon. They're referring to Aslan. And to me, I think it's so neat that Shasta, who has lived too far to hear the stories, and he hasn't heard anything about it, but he still gets this experience with Aslan. And he recognizes how powerful and how good he is, and just immediately falls at his feet. And how especially in the kind of the group we're in, and like even the country we're in, I think a lot of people have heard Jesus's name.
Yeah, we live in the West.
Right. It's more common, but there are also other people who may not have, and that, Aslan's for everybody, Jesus is for everybody. And I'm not 100% sure what to take away from that, except that it's just exciting to see this interaction.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but it is very clear that Shasta recognizes power. He recognizes divinity in front of him, despite not knowing much at all or anything about Aslan. Although he has heard some from Bree. It's not like he's never heard this name before. Although Aslan never says, my name is Aslan. He's just like, he said, I'm that lion. And Shasta does pick up on that part. Yeah. I do think some of that might come back to Lewis's own ideas of Christianity as the true myth, in this idea that he recognizes that, like, hey, within all of us, even within pagan myths themselves, God's beauty is everywhere, right? Like, if we believe that God is really the sole creator, if we believe that he is the sole storyteller in the narrative of humanity, then that means that you're going to find truth even in the most unlikely places. And that's why we see, Tolkien said some of this too, that's why we see pagan myths where we have a dying god who might be resurrected. This is what convinces, one of the things that convinces Lewis of Christianity when he's talking with Tolkien and Hugo Dyson. And so I do think some of that's coming through with Shasta here, as Shasta is falling down at his feet, because he knows that what's in front of him is beautiful, and what is in front of him deserves this kind of reverence.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
It does remind me too of Acts chapter 9, which I won't read now, but that is obviously the conversion of Saul to Paul on the road to Damascus. Just give us like a little short, I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but just give us a short kind of story for anybody who might not be familiar with this story from the New Testament.
Yeah, so Paul's original name was Saul, and he was extremely anti-Christian.
Yes.
He was a very devout Jew who was persecuting Christians in the church.
Yeah, he's actually there at the very first martyr, St. Stephen.
Right.
He's there watching Stephen get stoned to death.
Right. and in very violent ways against Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And he is on the way to Damascus, and there's this extremely bright light, and he is struck blind, and he later ends up becoming one of the most influential Christians.
And in that that conversion on the road to Damascus, Paul says something, and I don't know, different translations say different things, but he says something along the lines of like, "Who are you?" And the response is, "I'm Jesus, the one you are persecuting."
Yes.
And this kind of similar, like this question of who was there? It's me, you know. And thankfully, Shasta doesn't get that kind of response, which I'm sure is just the most terrifying response of, "Oh, it's the guy you're persecuting. It's me, right?"
Yeah.
Which I like, but again, that's
shoot.
it's the kind of thing, and I think sometimes the way that as we go through a lot of Bible stories, for a lot of my kids, this is the first time that they're interacting with the Bible outside of kind of a very like young elementary school style Sunday school class, right? So like when we get to David and Bathsheba, they're like, "Wait, David did what?" And the same thing. I think there's stories like this with Paul that when we tell this story, we're like, it's this story of a bad guy who became a good guy, and it's just so great that we describe this beautiful blind light as this. It's just glorious and it's wonderful, and instead of like, this is a horror story.
Yeah.
Like, and I love one of my favorite paintings of all time is by Caravaggio, and he has this beautiful, beautiful painting. I'll put it in the episode description of Paul on the road to Damascus, and he uses just his beautiful techniques of the way that Caravaggio uses light in his work. And to me, it's beautiful, but it's also terrifying. And that comes through in the light and the dark that Caravaggio was just so masterful at using. But this is like, he's falling on his feet and this voice comes through. And like, I think sometimes when we maybe talk about this with children, and I'm guilty of this as well. So this is not me, putting anyone else down. It's like, I'm like, and then this light comes through. It's like, it's me, Jesus, and I'm here, and I love you. And it's like, this is a horrifying thing to hear.
Yeah.
To solve. One, he's going to be blind for a little bit of time now, right? And this entire thing is terrifying. It's good, but it's terrifying. And I think Lewis, throughout the Chronicles, has really captured that well with Aslan. That so many of these interactions, Jill in Aslan's country, you think about Lucy, she's finding Aslan to be bigger in Caspian. Obviously, Eustace and Don Treader, and even back to like he's good, but he's not safe, right? With Mrs. Beaver, there's really this great communication by Lewis of the absolute power and the magnitude that Aslan has, and I think Lewis does a great job of pointing us back to the gospel and pointing us back to the Bible and getting a good sense of the fear that this actually should strike in us. And that's not something, I know a lot of times when we talk about the fear of God, especially in the 20th and now 21st century, there's a lot of questions about what the heck does that mean? And I think sometimes we almost wrap it in like, well, it doesn't actually mean being afraid at all. There's no real fear. And it's like, I don't know that Lewis would want us to think that there is some real fear, because this is a terrifying thing.
Yeah.
And Lewis does that so well here with Shasta.
It's one of my favorite things about the Narnia series in general is it's not a one-to-one thing, but he's pulling certain things and he's showing a story that some of us have heard a lot, but in a different way.
Yeah.
And it like, for example, we're both in our, your late 20s, early 30s, and we're talking about these stories again, but we're now thinking about them in a different light because this has started the conversation again.
Well, that is where that is the end of the chapter right there. Is there anything you want to read? This has been a great discussion, and we'd love to hear. We always love hearing from listeners. We're about to get into listener feedback, but especially with this chapter, we'd love to hear from listeners with their thoughts on this conversation between Aslan and Shasta, because it's so beautiful. I think this is the high point of the book for me at this point.
Yes, both literally and
on top of the mountain. That's right. Yeah.
So, but the reason I say that is this is a mountaintop experience. Even at the very end,
we're literally recording on a mountain right now.
Yeah, we're on a mountain. Shasta's on a mountain, And it ends with he's under a blue sky, he's by himself again, and there were birds singing.
Yeah.
And just what a great way to end that. And we also, and people who have had a mountaintop experience know, you do have to go back, and it's not always the mountaintop experience, and that can be tough too. But that's the way things are set up.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested to see what will happen coming up in chapter 12.
Well, speaking of what happens next, I have.
You have a dilemma?
Not a great one, man. To be honest, so the next chapter is called. We have chapter 12. It's called Shasta in Narnia, and I mean, it's just like, how is this all going to work out? Because we know that's going to happen, of course, at this point. And Aslan has come, and there's So is it kind of a cop out here to just say that in the next chapter, Shasta's going to get to Narnia. He's going to meet up with Erebus, Hwyn, and Bree, and they're going to make it in time to warn the Pevensies at Cair Paravel, and they're going to prepare for a battle at Cair Paravel with the Calormen.
Yep, I think that's an excellent guess. Totally fair.
I think here's another one too. I really do think that Anvard has fallen to the Calormen.
Okay,
to the Calormen.
I think they're too late.
And I don't feel bad for him because King Loon wasn't impressed with his leadership in this chapter.
Yeah.
So maybe it's time. Maybe it's time for a new king.
Well, we'll see.
And by the way, where's actually.
Another question is, why are there palm trees here in the mountain house?
You keep looking back at these things. Look, here's the thing. We're not going to be allowed to come back to this Airbnb if we rag on it too much. But there's
only one.
There are palm trees here in the porch room, the sunroom here, and it does not fit the decor of the rest of the house in the slightest bit.
No. And that's okay. Maybe you want a little pop of beach decor.
I do also want to point out that this was a conversation that you were the one who steered away from Narnia, because you're just, as I'm talking about my dilemma, you could not be more interested.
I thought we were sharing some
or
questions.
less. Sorry, you couldn't be less interested. No, as you're just staring around, looking at the palm trees.
This is a safe space to share things that we are confused about.
All right. Well, we have just time for one email today. We have got an email that I will go ahead and read here that talks about a couple of things that have popped up over the course of the last few chapters. It's an email entitled Beaver's Dam, Bree's Logic, and Suicidality. And this is an email from Holly. Hello, Phil and Daniel. I've been enjoying diving into The Horse and His Boy this season with you guys, and I am once again amazed at the quality of Lewis's writing. Oh, I thought she was going to say our podcast, but she said Lewis's writing instead. That's okay. That's all right. I agree. Lewis packs a rich array of characters, plots, and moral issues into a single, in quotation marks, children's book. Obviously, as you guys mentioned in the first episode this season, there are some issues with the way the Calormens are portrayed in comparison with the Narnians, issues that will become more prevalent in later chapters. I feel like the topic of racism in Lewis's works deserves an email of its own, so I'll try to write to you guys later on this season about that. In the meantime, here are some of my thoughts in response to some of the earlier episodes this season. So starting off with Beaver's Dam. Here's what Holly says about Beaver's Dam. Because remember, we brought this up as far as like, is it an actual landmark, or are they just talking about do you remember this at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's on the map.
It's on the map. So we're like, this is just their house
and
is on the map?
Just to keep our non-explicit rating, let's just say Beaver's Darn.
Oh, stop that. My understanding of Beaver's Dam as a proper place is that it's a landmark. It doesn't necessarily mean that there are no other beavers in Narnia, but it is labeled like a landmark on maps of Narnia, similar to the lamppost and the stone table. Since the beavers and their dam figure prominently in the story of Narnia's greatest kings and queens, it makes sense that it would become a memorial landmark. I like this. I like the fact that it's not a landmark on... let's imagine it's not a landmark on maps prior to...
But after that,
Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. But after that, we start seeing it in the histories
Okay.
because it's this important place where this is where the kings and queens were first welcomed into Narnia by other Narnians. Well, I guess Mr. Tumnus, but you don't want to talk about the kidnapped girl, so they probably skip They have their own form of revisionist history. They're like they don't bring up Mr. Tumnus trying to kidnap.
We're not denying that it happened. We just don't want to put it on that.
Yeah, it doesn't make it into the textbook of Narnia's history. All right, well, the next thing she's talking about is Bree's logic here. It's a little bit longer here, but a lot of good thoughts. And this is Bree's logic when it comes to borrowing from others when he's really stealing. When I read the part of Chapter 2 where Bree defends a decision to steal, I actually had a much different response to it than Daniel. I thought Bree's logic actually came across very sensible, given his and Shasta's unique contexts and histories. Both Shasta and Bree know that stealing is morally wrong. How Shasta came to learn that it's wrong isn't explained, and even Bree's morality isn't fully explained. He attributes his moral understanding to being a free, talking Narnian horse. Even though Bree is a Narnian, he is also a war horse and isn't actually free at the moment. His logic about stealing contrasts these aspects of his identity and experiences really well. I view this look into his reasoning as the first glimpse into his identity struggle rather than the rolling on the grass scene right afterwards. Bree's background is a complex mix of factors that contribute in various ways to his insecurities and to the decisions he makes now. Bree says that he and Shasta are prisoners and captives in an enemy country, and that the Tarkhan's money is booty and spoil. This is war language. Later in Chapter 3, when stealing is brought up again, Bree calls it raiding. From Bree's perspective, he and Shasta were the ones stolen. The years they both served as indentured slaves was also stealing on the part of the Calormans, since neither were paid for their work. He and Shasta are only in their current position because they were the ones originally wronged. This is the perspective of prisoners of war. Bree had likely seen the Calormans participate in many war raids and seen them take what belonged to someone else after conquering a nation. I'm not saying that stealing is morally okay under these circumstances. I really don't have an answer to that problem. What I am saying is that Bree's logic makes sense given Bree's background and given that Bree and Shasta are slaves trying to escape from bad circumstances.
What a well-written and constructed email and argument.
All
the evidence there. What do you think?
I think Holly brings up a really great point here. I also... that I think makes a lot of logical sense here.
Yeah.
I love the way that she has tied this back into Bree's struggles with his identity. You know, in reading The Horse and His Boy this way, I'm really enjoying the book, but I do wonder if I will like it much more when I get to read it for fun and not just, preparing for each episode because I've never read it before. I wonder if some of these issues, because I have brought up, this idea of, how do Aravis and Bree in particular, how do their identities as people who were decently well off in the Calorman society but are still trying to escape from it, very different, where Aravis is in a place of power, whereas Bree is in this, he's been kidnapped and brought in, but still is, he's a war horse, right? The way that this has kind of shaped their development over the course of this story. And I feel like I don't know exactly where the book ends, so I don't have a great picture of where we're going. But also I do feel like in reading and preparing just one chapter at a time, we've been reading this book for 7 months now, you and I. And so I'm forgetting some of the stuff that happened. I usually would not probably take more than half a year to read a 120-some page book, you know? And so hearing this, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that's a big part of who Bree is. And Holly's reminding me of that. And I wonder that if on rereads, those kind of issues of identity will play a more significant role in some of the themes that come up that you and I really haven't only just kind of mentioned in passing.
Right. And I also love how, because this email takes all the events and, truncates them, pushes them into a very short paragraph, now we get to see all the different words that he uses for kind of the same thing, but they are different in different contexts. And I don't know, it makes me want to go back and read this book after we finish this all the way through, just for fun, like you were talking about.
Yeah. Well, there's one final thing that she brings up here in her email, and I think it's interesting for us to talk about as well, too. She continues and talks about Eris's near suicide in chapter 3. Here's what she writes. It's been a long time since I've read this book, so I was surprised when I got to Eris's near suicide in chapter 3. I applaud Lewis for including such a painful but prevalent issue in his book, even more prevalent now than it probably was in his time. As someone who is training to become a clinical mental health counselor, a few things stood out to me about this scene. The first was the way that Hwyn responded. She tells Erebus not to kill herself because her life might improve if she decides to live, but she won't be able to experience a better life if she dies now. When Erebus ignores this and lifts the knife again, Hwyn gently places her head between Erebus and the knife. She doesn't shove Erebus or knock her down, but Hwyn doesn't just leave Erebus to her own devices either. Hwyn gently but effectively provides protection and a chance for Erebus to rethink her decision. Hwyn doesn't take away Erebus's autonomy. I'm sure that would not have gone over well if she had tried, but she does offer herself as a friend with an alternative perspective. The second thing I noticed was that after the two talked with each other, Erebus's hope returned. What a beautiful picture of a return from despair. The number one risk factor for suicide is hopelessness. Lewis nailed this one on the head. Erebus had lost hope, and Hwyn helped restore it. I think that's a really great, Holly, I think this is a really great way to talk about this. This is, I mean, we talked about this at the time, that this is probably the darkest kind of thematic material that we've worked through on Narnia. And you and I, even like a little behind the scenes, we even talked a little bit about how do we work with that, just because we're a very G-rated show with a lot of children that listen, or at least younger people. We know that we have kind of all different kinds of groups of people that listen. We're like, yeah, how do we engage with it, just because it can be a sensitive topic, right?
Right, for sure.
And wanted to make sure it wasn't something that we were...
A very loaded topic, too.
Yeah, exactly.
With varying levels of what can be okay at different ages to talk about.
At different ages, exactly. And I think that what Holly brings up here is that Lewis, by introducing that, we decided to go ahead and obviously talk about it because Lewis put it in the book, and the way that he does discuss these things, I think, is ultimately brings us to a place of hopefulness and optimism. And I think this is like a contrast with so much of the way that, here's my soapbox for a minute, so much of the way that mental health struggles can be portrayed often in our culture today, where there are some portrayals that are really great and do, I think, bring powerful representation that allows people to have important conversations. But there's also some that I think portray different mental health struggles in a way that actually ends with a lot of hopelessness. So it's like I almost sometimes I'll watch a movie or a TV show or read a book that almost ends with like I feel way worse about a situation because of this, or it feels like it ends in not the kind of hopeful way that Lewis presents us here. And I think a lot of that has to do with Lewis's faith, obviously, as well too. But I think he takes a really a grim topic and introduces it to us in a way that ultimately brings us hope, and through the relationship between Erebus and Hwyn.
Right. I'm grateful for the way he does that.
Yeah. Well, then Holly just wraps up the email by saying that she's been seriously impressed with all of my dilemmas so far. She said that I'm really good at predicting plots, and that's because I secretly read all the chapters ahead of time.
No. Actually, you don't.
Yeah,
You've
I don't.
done a really good job of holding back. It hasn't
I'm
been
trying
easy.
not to. Yeah, I'll try not to keep moving ahead. But I can now go ahead and read the next chapter as soon as we're done with this. Actually, I'll probably go to bed. But
Yeah. Late. We've recorded a lot today.
we have done a marathon sessions today. So, Phil, anything to say before we wrap up?
No, looking forward to chapter 12.
Well, why don't you go ahead and take it away, wrap up this episode.
This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you too can listen to a bonus episode each month, along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to Elias Dean, Hannah Anderson, John Marr, Emily Wakefield, and Ryan Smith for supporting us at our top tiers. Listener feedback can be sent to thenarniapodcast@gmail.com, Or if you want to leave us a voicemail, 406-646-6733. A review on Apple Podcast or another podcast manager will help other listeners find the show and join our read-through. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we will be back next time with Chapter 12.